Okay, aloha everyone. I'm Evan Leong and welcome to Save Hawaii Jobs and Business webinar with Team Hawaii. So Team Hawaii is our congressional teams, the SBA, local banks, and volunteers, and you, the employer. So we are focused on getting as much of the CARES Act funds as possible here to Hawaii, and that's kind of what the purpose of this webinar today is for. So today we're going to go over where we are as of today, this minute, as things change constantly and daily. This is where we're at right now with updates from Congress, the SBA, banks, and our team. If this is fairly new to you, then we have a resource folder with version 13 of the Cliff Notes version of our memo for PPP, along with the memo outlining the forgiveness of the PPP loan, which we will need to pay special attention to. We have previous webinars going over the basic mechanics that you can review, and Buddy will post the links for that in the chat. Okay, the way the questions will work during this webinar is we'll take it in the Q&A chat box only. That's at the bottom of the screen if you're on the your computer Q&A area. If you post it to the chat box, we won't see it. So please post it into the Q&A. You can also upvote the questions in there so the most popular questions can get answered. And for unanswered questions, we have to change this a bit because we've been having such a massive influx of questions, we just can't keep up. So for 30 minutes after this webinar is done, all questions going to questions@braingainhi.com. We will do our best to answer. After that, we've got to wait to the next webinar, okay? We have word that some PPP loans are already approved and funded, so that's a good sign. So without further ado, let me introduce the team for today. We're very lucky to have the Honorable Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard with us today. Jane Sawyer, who's the District Director for the Hawaii SBA. We have Arnold Martinez, who's the Group EVP for Central Pacific Bank. Darren Leong from the Law Office of Darren R. Leong. Stacy Katakura, CEO of Cumulus. And then in the background, you won't see these people, but they're going to be in the Q&A and answering questions. Jeff Harris, who's a senior and named partner for Torkelson Law Firm. We have Kainoa Penarosa, who's the Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Gabbard. We have Andres Chauville, policy advisor for Congresswoman Gabbard. And then in the background, we have Buddy Leong, who's an analyst here at Brain Gain, and Coco, who's helping us out. So without further ado, please take it away, Congresswoman Gabbard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evan, Jane, everyone who is joining this effort in this webinar here today. It's a really fantastic resource for our local business owners, small business owners. People are just searching for, as you said, the up to the minute information based on what we have, given this situation is constantly evolving really on a day-to-day basis. Look, I think that a lot of the primary resources, the PPP, the emergency loans that are available through small business have been talked about. I'll go over a few things quickly based on the information that we have. Part of this last CARES legislation, this last massive aid package that Congress passed a few weeks ago, included more funding that's actually going to public health care providers, to hospitals, to our counties through community block development grants, the CDBG funds, transportation funds. There's a number of other resources in probably over $300 million at this point that have already made their way to Hawaii, which is a positive thing. I started getting text messages early this morning from people saying, hey, finally, we got our stimulus funds direct deposited into our bank accounts, individuals who are saying that. So that is another positive step that is a little bit later than the administration said they would come, but I know people are starting to get those resources. I saw one of the questions already, and this is something that really I think just came up earlier today, is the Trump administration saying that the small business funding is going to run out here very shortly, before the end of this week. So this points to the effort underway right now, which I support in the Senate, to pass a plus up to the small business stimulus funding, given clearly what was resourced in that last CARES bill didn't even come close to being enough to provide the support to real small business owners, sole proprietors, people here in Hawaii and across the country, many of whom are even now having trouble accessing those funds, even through local banks. or national banks for that matter. I was on a call with House congressional leadership yesterday, and unfortunately, it seems like as of this moment, they're at a bit of a roadblock in negotiations between the House Democrats and Chuck Schumer and Senate Republicans about how the $250 billion for small businesses would be allocated and resourced. We have all been hearing concerns from small business owners saying that, well, if they're not a member of their local bank, that they're not being prioritized to be able to get those funds directly, or that certain small businesses that have relationships with their financial institutions are getting preferential treatment over others, or the very smallest of small businesses that don't have a lot of leverage are having difficulty accessing those funds. So this is where the details have to be worked out between the Democrats and the Republicans, ultimately to plus up those resources so that they don't run out, and to make it so that they are more easily accessible with more clear guidance. I think that that's been one of the challenges here. Jane Sawyer's been amazing in joining our congressional telephone town halls, answering questions from people, and the guidance is changing because things are happening quickly, and we just want to be able to try to streamline that as much as possible. So the next step to this, once congressional leaders are able to come to some form of agreement on how this minimum of $250 billion would be allocated towards small businesses, is actual passage. Both the House and Senate are not in session right now. They are not due to return now. At least the House is not due to return until May 4th. The Senate goes back into session on April 20th. However, both leaders in the House and the Senate have said as soon as they're able to reach agreement on this stimulus package part 2 for small businesses, they would immediately go back in to session to try to get this passed right away, understanding the urgency of this situation. One of the other things that Congress is looking to do, aside from providing further funding for the PPP, is to look at temporarily relaxing certain regulatory requirements like the Know Your Customer requirements, again, to make it easier for lenders to quickly process loans and deliver funds to small businesses. There's been new guidance released today on those who are self-employed and independent contractors as far as how to calculate payroll and other very specific questions that they have. I know we have some other folks here who may still be processing this information just because it just came down today. There are a number of other things that we're working on here as your representative, one of your representatives in Congress. I'm in Hawaii right now. Obviously, we'll head back to Washington as soon as we are called back into session. But in the meantime, I have a great team in Washington, D.C., as well as here in Hawaii. Everyone is working very hard to be able to continue to try to work through some of these challenges that people are facing, whether you're a small business owner and you're not able to get the answers to the questions that you have, or as we're seeing with many Hawaii residents, they have loved ones or family members who are stuck overseas in another country and are unable to repatriate and get back home. We're working to make sure that the orders to halt all foreclosures and eviction proceedings are upheld, continuing to work to get more funding in this next round of aid beyond the $250 billion for small business owners, looking at our local agriculture sector and farmers who are being hard hit right now, looking at the other sectors who may have fallen through the cracks in this last funding package, as well as to really start looking ahead to recognize, hey, this is not a 4-week problem or a 6-week problem. We don't yet know the duration of this both healthcare crisis and economic crisis. And it is something I've been advocating since the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak in the US, is to really take the longer term approach to allocate more resources that will provide some certainty for individuals and small business owners, rather than taking this kind of, maybe week by week approach, depending on Congress to get back into session and to appropriate more funds. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing right now, and really where it is necessary for all partisan politics to be set aside and for leaders to lead. Now is the time for leaders to lead and to really put the interests of the people in this country, everyone from the self-employed Uber driver who's working on the gig economy, to the small business owner, to the larger corporations, to the stay-at-home parents. Everyone is dealing with hardship at one level or another, and we all have to stand together as Americans now to be able to take care of each other and to get through this together. I'll stop it there, Evan. I'm sure we can get into more details with some of the specific questions that are being asked.
Thank you, Congresswoman Gabbard. Yeah, one of the questions that is coming up relates to some of the businesses that are the most hard hit, like retail and restaurants, tourist-facing businesses that are effectively temporarily closed right now. And the question that they have is, when they get the PPP, in order to get full forgiveness, it requires them bringing back their entire staff essentially on full payroll, when they may have, creative work for them to do, but in some cases not a full amount of work, and it feels awkward to them to bring back that staff. Our understanding was that this is exactly the situation that PPP was designed for. Was, if the government is going to subsidize employees and individuals, it's better to do it on payroll rather than on unemployment, where it's very difficult to get people back to work. But could you comment on that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really great question, Darren, and I think it speaks to the integrity of our small business owners. But you're exactly right that when you look at the well-being and the outlook of your employees, that both from a government perspective as well as from their perspective, being able to have that continuity and certainty that they can remain employed, ideally maintain any healthcare benefits that they have, and understand that at least for this 8-week duration of time, that they're not going to have to worry about how they're going to pay the rent or put food on the table. And I think really it's an opportunity. Yes, it's a challenge, but let's turn this challenge into an opportunity where, let's say if you're a retailer that's not an essential shop, but you have the ability to keep your employees, this is a great opportunity for professional development of some sort, of how you can help maybe create other opportunities for your employees that you don't normally have the time to do when you've got a shop with your doors open all day and things are slammed and things are busy. I think it's a great opportunity to kind of start to think outside the box and say, okay, you've got people, whether they're staying at home and working or going to a physical location. What's the best way to be able to help them and maybe help your business in the longer term?
That's very helpful. Thank you. We'll pass it to Jane Sawyer, head of the Hawaii SBA, for updates.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today. I usually have some technical difficulties, but I hope you can hear me. Just to give you a little bit of an update on how Hawaii is doing. And thank you, Congresswoman, for giving us your outlook and what you see happening around you. I also want to give a big shout out to all of our banks here. The SBA has some key responsibilities through the CARES Act, and I think over the last 3 weeks, we've been hearing lots about them and how they're working, or some of the difficulties that we've had in really deploying the resources to the community. But I want to say, I think that particularly with the most recent information that came out, it's kind of gratifying to know that through our PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Plan loans, we've gotten over 8,426 loans to small businesses here in Hawaii. These were the numbers that came in effective on Monday, and that brought over $1.6 billion to the state of Hawaii for small businesses to get their employees back on the payroll and to help those small businesses make it through this economic downturn. Now, we're not all, looking at the best outcomes that we were hoping to have for 2020, but we are looking at having some relief, hopefully keeping our employees around, finding productive things for them to do or to develop those employees, as the Congresswoman said. And our banks are really working hard with their customers and new clients to make sure that they understand what their opportunities are and really putting, really pushing through to get these loans done. The PPP is one of the programs that was made possible by the CARES Act. A week prior to that, SBA announced the economic injury disaster loans, which were other loans that went through SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance. So we developed two different channels to start bringing financial assistance to small businesses here in Hawaii. So this is such an unprecedented thing. We have never seen something on this national scale ever before. So we've had a lot of trouble with the logistics, just with the technical issues, but we've rolled out a loan program in just 7 days and then modified another loan program in 7 days that really is getting the dollars out to small businesses, and we'll continue to do that. The average loan size that we're seeing across the nation has been approved, has been over $230,000. So that's getting a lot of money through our banking system, through our Office of Disaster Assistance to help you, the small businesses out here. So we are encouraging everyone to take a look at and apply for the loans, work with your banker, work with the SBA, go to sba.gov to see what the parameters are of all of these programs. And these are just some of the tools to help your small businesses. There are a lot of other programs with federal agencies that can assist you. Whether one of these programs doesn't work for you, it may be a tax credit. There could be some other assistance with mortgage relief or deferment of payments, but you need to look at all of those to kind of put together a patchwork that's really going to be the best for you as an individual citizen, for you as a business owner, for you as an employer, to be able to get through this and be able to start again when the economy starts to recover. I think some of the other things besides the economic injury loan, besides the PPP, that a lot of people aren't really aware of is that there is some SBA debt relief available if you have a small business loan from an SBA backed small business loan, either a 7A loan with one of our banks or a 504 loan with one of the banks. You can approach your bank to have them defer the payments. And there is a new feature through the CARES Act where SBA will cover your payment and the fees for your loans for an extended period of time here. So do talk to the bank. That also applies. SBA will give you a deferment if you have a recent SBA disaster loan. So they'll also defer the payments on those loans. So you need to get in touch with the SBA Office of Disaster Assistance. And you can find them again by going to www.sba.gov and click on the disaster link at the top of the program. I think that kind of gives us a little bit of an overview. I think it has been indicated, and we'll hear some more from the banks who are actually working really hard with the individual borrowers to push those loans through, dealing with a lot of the questions that individual small businesses do have on the programs. But we are, both of the programs, and particularly the PPP, has some specific provisions that will also then feature forgiveness for a major portion of your loan. Those things happen or really come into play in calculating your loan amount, because it is based on payroll. And then it also is based on keeping or getting those employees that you may have furloughed back on your payroll, including, overall payroll costs that go with that as soon as your loan is dispersed. So I think we'll have some details on that from some of the other speakers on the program. And I guess that's kind of the overview of where we are. I'm encouraged again to know that loans are being approved. They are flowing out. Hawaii's doing, remarkably well to get the loans in and approved. So I thank the banks. And Arnold, I thank Central Pacific Bank for really being a leader and stepping up with this. But most of our Hawaii banks are really diligently working to make sure that you understand the program and you have access. So go to their websites online. You can find somebody, if it's not your current bank, find another bank that may be doing a lot of these loans and check out how they're doing their intake. Most everyone is taking them in remotely. The application for the PPP is the page. There are 3.5 pages, and 2 of that is information about your eligibility for your business, and you certify to your lender that you're giving them the correct information, you're supplying the right data, and it can really actually move your application into queue pretty quickly, and we hope that we'll see a quick turnaround. And they are working as quickly as possible to get those things into the system and approved by SBA. So we do keep that money flowing for you. Evan or Darren?
Great, thanks, Jane. We'll pass it to Arnold Martinez from Central Pacific Bank to provide some updates from the bank's perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you, Darren. And thanks, Tulsi and Jane, for your efforts in all of this as well. As the COVID-19 impact was becoming pretty obvious, we started reaching out to our customers even before the Paycheck Protection Program was established, was put together, and we felt the stories in our hearts about how these businesses were being impacted, and we had every single one of our frontline people talking to our customers. And I can tell you, when the Paycheck Protection Program came out, it wasn't hard to mobilize our team, because the stories and the heartfelt concern that everyone had for our customers and for our business community, it was the wind beneath our wings, per se. It wasn't hard to mobilize and to get our team together to support this process. And I can tell you that for the last 12 days, the CPB team, and I'm sure similar at other banking organizations in town, have been working pretty much 24/7 to be able to process these loans. It's a process that we didn't have in place before, and so it's very manual. But the teams really come together, and there's nobody complaining about anything. There's a lot to complain about. Everyone trying to figure things out. Our political leaders trying to get the funding in place, and SBA trying to figure out, and Treasury trying to figure out what the rules are. Nobody's complaining. We're just trying our best to understand the program and try to get the money out to our business community. I'll just add that we've been very thankful for the patience of our customers and the business community as well. I think they understand that everyone is doing their best to support them, and as quickly as we can. One of the things that I'd like to really encourage those that are listening, to talk to other business people. As much as we've been able, as Jane mentioned, over 8,000 loans and over 1.6 billion in funding, there's still a lot of businesses out there that need help, and a lot of business owners may not understand about the forgiveness aspect of the loan. So they may be they may not want to apply. They may think, I don't want to get another loan. I don't need another loan. I don't need any more debt. And so we need to get the word out to everyone that there's a forgiveness aspect. And I know that there's still a lot of details that we have to share with regard to how that process is going to work to be able to get loans forgiven. But know that it's clear, if they use the funds to bring back their employees, to pay for payroll, they can cover rent, they can cover utilities, they can cover mortgage interests if they have a loan that on their property, owner-occupied type of property. There's a lot of different things they can use those funds for, and the loan can be completely forgiven. So we need to get the word out to everyone that, to apply if you haven't, and to help. It's a village, right? Right now, we all have to help each other and pay it forward, and ensure that every single business owner knows that the program is a loan that's going to be forgiven, and that they should apply, and the banks will help them to educate them through the process, and to try to get them help as they really need help at this point. I'll just end by saying that we are doing everything we can to support the business community. Our team is 100% committed, and we have appreciated all of the collaboration from everyone, the political leaders, Jane and her team. Text messages going out at 1 o'clock in the morning, and people responding, because everybody's up focused on this to support our community.
Thank you, Arnold. One question we're getting is your bank accepting still PPP applications, including from non-customers?
Yeah, so we're still accepting applications. We actually put our portal up, our web portal, up 2 days before the SBA was accepting applications, because we knew that it was going to be a substantial demand for the loan program, and so we are still accepting applications, and I just ask people to be patient. Given the demand, we're going as fast as we can, but we will accept the applications, and as long as there's funds for us to use to support these business customers, we're committed to do so.
Great, thank you, Arnold. Stacy and I wanted to take the opportunity to address some of the forgiveness issues that are coming up in greater detail. The caveat to all of this is there has not yet been real definitive or detailed guidance from the SBA and Treasury yet on the forgiveness aspect. We think it's because the program has been rolled out so quickly that the initial push was to get guidance out on how to calculate loan amounts. But now that the money will be going out in the next or two, increasing, we think, at a fairly high clip, forgiveness is now something on everyone's mind. To that end, we posted or published a memo specifically on forgiveness last evening. It's on the shared or public Google Drive. We expect that to be updated fairly regularly as new information comes out. The memo, or at least, is broken down into forgiveness in a couple of categories, and we'd just like to highlight some of the requirements that we are hearing a number of questions about. First is that the funds to be forgiven need to be used for allowable uses. So even before you get to forgiveness, you have to use the fund money for allowable uses to be eligible for that money to be forgiven. Allowable uses are payroll costs and the things that you've heard about, rent, utility, et cetera. But it's within the period ending June 30th, 2020. That is in the section of the statute that specifically applies to allowable uses. So unless and until there's other guidance that comes out, that is what the statute says. The second rule is essentially a second time limitation, which is that forgiveness is for the use of these funds in the 8-week period following loan disbursement. So not only do you have to use it for allowable uses prior to June 30th, it has to be within the 8-week period following loan disbursement. We expect some increased guidance to come out on that as well. There's some terms in the statute that apply there, particularly a section of the statute that says it has to be for costs incurred and payments made. So we expect there to be guidance in the near future from SBA on that. The third rule is probably the one that swallows the others, which is that no more than 25% of the forgivable, of the forgiveness amount may be used for non-payroll costs. What that means in practice is several things. It means as your forgiveness amount decreases, so does the amount, that 25%, that decreases as the total forgiveness amount decreases. So in order to get full forgiveness of the loan, you essentially need to use the entire loan amount for the within the percentages that are described in the rule, which means that in order to use 25% of the loan funds for non-payroll costs such as rent and utilities, you will need to end up using the other 75% in full for payroll costs. What that likely means for many of the businesses out there, in order to use 75% of the loan proceeds for payroll costs within 8 weeks, it likely means bringing back everyone at 100% or something very close to that. The calculations business by business will differ to some degree, but most of the examples equate 75% of your PPP funds to 8 weeks of full 100% payroll. If you end up doing that, which we think is exactly what this law is intended to do, which is to bring people back and get them back on payroll, then the fourth and fifth rules become somewhat less important, but I'll just quickly highlight those fourth and fifth rules. The fourth one is a headcount rule, which is that you need to maintain the average monthly full-time equivalent headcount equal or more than in a look-back period. And you have two choices for that look-back period. One choice is the first 2 months of this year to get your headcount, and the other is the February 15 to June 20 period of last year. The last rule is one that relates to decreasing pay, which says that you cannot decrease an employee's pay or employees who are paid annually $100,000 or less, more than 25%. Again, those last two rules, the headcount rule and the individual employee decrease in pay rule, they probably do not come into play if you are sticking to the 25%, 75% rule. So this is addressed in much greater detail in the forgiveness memo, but I'll pass it to Stacy for just a few more comments on this forgiveness issue.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Darren. We've been spending a lot of time answering a lot of questions from those of you who have been joining us for these webinars, and I just wanted to highlight some of the most commonly asked questions and answers. As Darren already mentioned, the 8-week period begins on the date that the funds are first dispersed. So I've seen a lot of banks that are notifying you that your loan has been approved by the SBA, and they'll be contacting you to negotiate or to sign the loan documents. So I would recommend that you really work closely with your bank, if possible, to control the timing of when you receive the funds, because for those of you who have furloughed or laid off your staff, you will need to mobilize your workforce again, and that might take some time. So just something to consider. You want to make sure that you are able to maintain your FTE count for the full 8 weeks as soon as your funds are dispersed. Another question that we get a lot is the cost incurred and payments language that Darren had mentioned. A lot of you are on semi-monthly payroll, and so that means potentially that there is only 3 pay periods in the 8 weeks. That we are waiting for the guidance from the Treasury and the SBA. The forgiveness section of the statute says that the final regulations are to be issued within 30 days of the statute, which is in roughly about 2 weeks. So we are tracking that issue, and we'll be posting updates as soon as they become available. The other thing that comes up a lot is during that 8-week period, if you guys are going to be offering your furloughed employees their positions back, once you offer an employee their position back, they are ineligible for unemployment. So there's also a misconception that because some of your employees will be making more on unemployment, they might be hesitant to come back. But I think there's also a misconception out there that your former employees or your employees that are furloughed are actually getting paid the unemployment benefits. There is a severe backlog in the unemployment office, and I think there's not a lot of people that are actually receiving unemployment. I'm sure they'd be welcome. They'd be looking forward to receiving a paycheck again. So kind of on another note, the two primary measurements of forgiveness are measured independently of each other. The FTE requirement is measured independently of the 75%, 25% rule. So for the FTE requirement, if you are unable to meet the FTE requirement, you will likely have excess funds that can be converted into a loan, or more likely you will be able to repay the loan with no prepayment penalties at the end of the 8 weeks. 75% of the loan proceeds are to be used on payroll costs. And again, if you are unable to utilize 75% of the loan proceeds on payroll costs, you aren't able to use the proceeds on unallowed uses, as Darren mentioned. Some tips on to how to make sure that you are able to use the 75% of the loan proceeds on payroll costs. You are able to, you probably want to track that closely, like how much you've spent on payroll costs, and towards the end of the 8 weeks, you might be able to bonus some small bonuses to employees to make sure that you're able to get there. And keep in mind that contributions to a retirement plan or profit sharing plan is also acceptable. It's an allowable use. And then finally, I just in thinking about down the road, each of you are going to want to apply for forgiveness with your lender. And I think just some tips to think about to make it easier for you to demonstrate how you spent the funds. I would recommend that you consider opening a separate bank account to hold your loan proceeds and pay for the qualified expenses out of that bank account, which would be your payroll, rent, mortgage interest, and really try to be mindful and keep in mind you understand what expenses are excluded. I think a lot of people don't realize that the employer's share of the FICA and employer's FUTA are not eligible. So, for those of you who are bringing back employees, if you don't have revenue coming in, that is a cost that's not allowed in the use of the proceeds. Compensation in excess of $100,000 annually. So you can pay your employees over $100,000, but it has to be funded from other sources other than the PPP loan sources. And this is the $100,000 salary is exclusive of your health care costs, SUTA, and retirement plan contributions. So that's a separate measurement. You cannot use the funds to pay an independent contractor or sole proprietor. You can't use the funds to pay other accounts payable. And finally, something to keep in mind, if you are using a PEO to process your payroll, their administrative fee or payroll processing fees are excluded. So I know, if you are opening up a separate account to be able to use pay your payroll costs, and you're having your payroll processor draw money directly from that account, you'll need to replenish that account for the admin fee and the processing fees and all the other excluded costs. So I think that's kind of all the frequently asked questions that we've been getting. one of the, before we started this webinar, we kind of talked a little bit about, so a lot of the times that we've been answering questions, because there has been a lack of guidance that's been issued to date. A lot of times we have to say, you know, we're waiting for the Treasury to issue their final regs or further guidance to be issued. I want to kind of pass it back to Jane, because we had talked about this before the webinar started. You know, how are the banks and the SBA going to be looking at the borrowers who have borrowed funds and expended funds, and guidance that will be issued on a future date? How will that be looked at?
Okay, so if I understand your question, it's like, if we're proceeding kind of in good faith and how we're reporting or how we're looking at the information, and based on the guidance that we have now, how will it be considered should something change as we go forward and the expectations would change? My understanding is based on when a change in guidance or a change in how we're looking at this is submitted and shared through official guidance that comes down from SBA, that any previous actions based on previously available information would be accepted. But as of the date the guidance would come to clarify or perhaps change something, that would be implemented at that time or become effective at that time. I'm, you know, because this has happened, you know, in increments or things coming down and really defining how we look at this, it's a changing thing there. I know that doesn't give us a lot of security as people look at some of these things, but that is right now, you know, we kind of need to move forward in good faith that these things will be taken care of and nobody will be harmed or penalized with some of these changes. So the thing I would say to any borrower is document, document, document. Keep your records. Make sure that you maintain a file that has the information or guidance that you received at the time. And check back with SBA, check back with your banker regularly as you move through this process. And we are trying to, everything's being issued, you know, day to day. So keep updated.
Thank you, Jane. The next question, or actually it's two questions for Congresswoman Gabbard. The first question is can you address the status or updates with respect to the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDLs? And then the second question is for you know, small businesses in terms of looking forward past the June timeframe, and you know what the uncertainty with how long the businesses will have to remain shut down, et cetera. Do you have any advice or thoughts for those businesses looking forward?
Thank you, Darren. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in on the EIDL, people putting applications in, not having gotten responses. And unfortunately, this is a national problem. There have been a lot of issues because the EIDL program is stressed and underfunded and desperately needs more funding given the demand that's out there within our communities. According to the National Federation of Independent Businesses Research Center, according to them, none of the small business owners who have applied for EIDLs have received a loan or an emergency grant. They've heard from members across the country, as well as what we've seen in recent media reports, which is that the EIDL funds have been exhausted largely because of small businesses who are applying for and getting the $15,000 advance and limited grant of $1,000 per employee. So on a positive note, there is bipartisan agreement in the Senate to put $300 billion specifically towards the EIDL program to be able to dedicate those resources now to where they're needed. The timing of that is something that I can't speak to. I think it's something everyone recognizes needs to be done quickly, as soon as possible. But again, this is going to require passage of some form of legislation in the Senate that we're hopeful they find their way to do here, within coming days rather than coming weeks. As far as the timeline for small business owners on when we can expect to see our economy start to be revived, doors being opened, shops being reopened, look, I think it's too soon to tell. From what I have seen from experts, this will depend on different industries, different sectors. It will depend on the decisions that are being made in specific localities. If you watched any of the news yesterday, you saw a lot about President Trump saying that he's going to make the decision about when to reopen the economy in the country. Governors will have their own say in that matter. Every one of our states is at a different point in the curve. And fortunately for us here in Hawaii, because we are an island state, we can make that decision based on what our needs are and what's best for the people of Hawaii, without having to think about a neighboring state that may be at a different place in this coronavirus curve. But even so, as we've seen here in Hawaii, the responses to this crisis has been vastly different county by county. And there are some people who are happy about that, some people who are not happy about that. But this is where it's just tough to forecast exactly when this is going to happen. I think a key component to this that we've heard a lot of experts talking about in the last few days is, in order for our economy to start reopening, we have to have the ability for rapid testing and mass testing, so that whether it's people who are boarding flights to come into Hawaii or fly out of Hawaii, that's something that airlines are going to start expecting, that you're going to have a rapid test before you board that flight to make sure that you don't have infected people going on airplanes. That obviously has a direct impact on Hawaii. There's going to be a whole set of new norms here that it's not quite possible to predict, but I think it will be done cautiously. My view and my opinion is that I hope and urge our state and federal leaders and county leaders, for that matter, to make these decisions based on the health and lives of our loved ones, the people of Hawaii, and not make this decision prematurely that may appear to have a positive impact on our economy in the short term, but will have a devastating impact not only on our economy and the people of Hawaii, for a longer period of time. So I think it's just important that we bite the bullet now. We fight for these resources to help our small business owners keep their heads above water for as long as possible, for as long as we need to, so that we can put people's health and lives first, and then focus on working together to get those paddles back in the water, and work hard to see some kind of new sense of normalcy, whatever that may look like.
Great, thank you, Congresswoman Gabbard. We're going to switch gears back to the PPP and some practical tips. Arnold, what do you have to say in terms of what people or businesses should do, or documentation that will need to be provided to the bank to substantiate loan forgiveness?
Yeah, so I think Stacy did a pretty good job in explaining some of the documentation that's going to be required. And as I mentioned, our bank's going to be communicating on a weekly basis post-funding on educating our customers, or educating the applicants that apply through us about what they need to do. But I would say the most important, because the biggest part of calculating the loan amount is the payroll. So the biggest part of record keeping, the most important is the payroll records for the 8-week subsequent to the approval. And Stacy brings up a really good point earlier, that if a business has furloughed their employees, they may want to get their employees mobilized again, and kind of have a start date established and align that with the funding date so that they can ensure that that the payroll costs for bringing those employees back to work aligns with the 8-week period. But again, the most important is the payroll, because that's the biggest amount that's going into the loan amount. And so certainly the biggest amount that can be forgiven as a result.
Great, thank you, Arnold. I mean, I would just add to that, the 8-week period runs from loan disbursement. And that is that period of time when you have to use this money. So if you are, late to the game in terms of you got the money, but then your employees are coming back 2 weeks later and that sort of thing, that may end up affecting your ability to obtain full forgiveness. So to Stacy and Arnold's point, early planning is the best way to go. And from what we've seen, once the SBA has issued loan numbers or conditional approvals, and there's 10 days or so to between that point in time and having the funds in hand, that's the period of time when you should really be getting squared away what your plan will be for that 8 weeks. It's the reason why we've scrambled to put together the forgiveness memo, and I think why we're seeing so many of these questions now. I'll pass it back to Congresswoman Gabbard for closing thoughts on anything you'd like the business community to be aware of or keep in mind going forward.
Great, thank you, Darren. The main thing for me and for my team is we are your advocates in Washington. We are getting messages to congressional leadership, sharing the real-time feedback, challenges, obstacles that our small business owners here in Hawaii are facing. So it's been so helpful to have direct opportunities like this, to be able to hear from you directly through our telephone town halls, through Jane Sawyer, through local bank leaders. So I just would encourage you to share your feedback with us. I'll just give you our office phone number right now is 808-541-1986. That's 541-1986. Like I said, we're teleworking, we're checking messages multiple times a day. We want to hear from you. We want to be able to provide assistance to you directly if we can. But if there's a legislative fix, your entire Hawaii delegation, we are all working together hand in hand to be able to get those fixes included into the next iterations of stimulus aid that we can expect. I mentioned earlier the $250 billion package that the Senate is working on right now. That's something that we expect to happen more likely in the coming days rather than in the coming weeks. But both the House and Senate are scheduled to go back into session May 4th, pending advice from healthcare leaders and the situation in the country at that time. DC and kind of the DC, Baltimore, the Maryland area, unfortunately, they are projected to be a hot spot here in the coming days. Hopefully it clears up by then, but assuming that May 4th timeline is met, we're already working on writing this fourth aid package that will be a larger aid package, again, more directly addressing the need for assistance to be injected directly into our communities with a great focus on our small business owners. So I just want you to know we're fighting for you. Please keep in touch. Look forward to being able to continue to participate in forums like this. And thank you all for providing this platform for all of us to be able to stand together in this. Aloha.
Great, thank you, Congresswoman Gabbard. We appreciate your resources. We'll just reiterate the resources that we have posted, the Google Drive with our memos, and also at least for the next half an hour, feel free to send questions if they have not been answered here. Feel free to send them to questions@braingainhi.com. And to all of you out there, thank you. And we expect to continue to do these webinars and try to get the information out to you. We're a small team. We're doing the best we can. So thank you for your support, and thank you everyone on the panel today for joining us. Take care.